presentation. I thought I'd start by saying we thought this is quite an intimate event, and I've noticed there's quite a lot of spaces in the middle here. And if you want to see the screen well, the people on the edges don't see so well. So maybe the people in the middle can move up a little bit closer, and with, I know, some empty seats, so you'll just see a little bit better. I'm going to show about 250 images. So I think it's worth having a good seat to be able to see the images. And it also makes the event a little bit more cozy if we get closer to each other. And also it means I can see if you're using your mobile phone. Now, do you have okay, have I got the clicker? So I wanted to talk a little bit, maybe philosophically, but also practically about questions of mobility. What we want to do in these days, we want to make the class kind of reactive to the things you ask about. And it was very clear when Myra had her dreaming session yesterday that this theme of mobility and mobility in our everyday life is actually very, very important. So I thought that would kind of be a theme. I want to talk about some things very, very specifically. So we'll talk a lot about cycling in Copenhagen with more information because that was something you asked for, but also this global view of mobility and urbanism. And then I'm going to have to ask at some point if somebody could arrange some water, because I think in the next hour I'll need some water. So I think we talked about yesterday, who's it for? And I'm always so impressed when I go to Tokyo and I can see a 5-year-old girl out on her own in a metropolis. And that's maybe a sign that something is working. And it's also a question of, and I'd say from Gehl, we're not about designing the most efficient bicycle highway or delivering the most efficient transport system. We are interested in when everything comes together, when the public transport and the bike and ordinary people are in the same space, sharing the same space together. And you can see it's quite nice because the dad and the baby's sleeping. And this is how we land the different aspects of transportation in our everyday life in this soft way. And if you ask the challenges, and this is the five most significant challenges facing cities today: transport, employment, population growth, governance, finance. It's interesting that transport comes out on top. And so maybe it was no surprise that yesterday, when you talked about your challenges, almost all of them were about transportation. Now, you don't need to speak Japanese to understand this. I think we know this. And I'm sure you've all seen, these kind of images of, how much space people take up on different forms of transport. So I guess we all know this, so we don't need to talk about that. And if they got on bikes. And what are the things, the stresses that people have? And I find working around the world, we hear the same thing. People talk about the things that stress them, the problems they have when they live in the city, like stress and safety, noise, pollution, health issues. And I guess even when I talk to people around the world, I find the same kind of aspiration, the same kind of wishes. People want to have a better life than their parents have. They want their kids to have a better life than I had. People worry about getting to work. People worry about losing their job. And so I think, around the world, we see the same kind of issues. And what I talked about yesterday was that everybody only has 24 hours. And I think that's the most democratic thing about life. And, this is very sensitive. So I guess if we're lucky, we sleep 1/3. We work at least 1/3, maybe a big third. And we've got 1/3 left for everything else. And if you're stuck in traffic, and in Mexico, that's 3 hours a day at least, there's not much left. And so we're also very interested in what happens here, both here, and how we can reduce this or how we can make this more pleasant. Now, this is our everyday. You asked about getting to work. This is the train I take in the morning with Ola. And if we're lucky, there can be a few Gehl staff sitting on the train. And we can maybe, well, first of all, getting a seat is a luxury. Big start. But if there's a little bit of space, a little table, if there is a kind of reasonable level of vibration that you can actually read and work, all these other things happen. And I think we're incredibly privileged because in the 40 minutes that we spend every day on transport, we can use this time for something else. We can talk, we can work, we can read, maybe we can sleep. And this suddenly means in this 24 hours where we have so little time, that the time can become more valuable. And I think we're very obsessed because maybe transportation is like an engineering issue. So we think a lot about efficiency and capacity, and we're impressed by efficient systems. And of course, if you go to Japan, it's really amazing. You go to this Shibuya crossing, and you see these thousands of people crossing the street at the same time, really controlled, in this amazing discipline. But I'm kind of interested in this human dimension, a softer dimension. And this is in Basel in Switzerland, outside the central railway station. And I was amazed that people come in and out of the railway stations, thousands every hour from the main railway station. And here, there's no traffic light. And here, there is no designated crosswalk. People just move out in between, and with all of their fragility, and I think there's old people with sticks, moving between the tram tracks, and people with their kids. And I started to think, well, maybe this is an extreme example, but it tells us about how soft transportation can be, and just reminding us about being human. And it strikes me that almost never are people walking like really efficiently, like people are carrying stuff. They've got their kid with them, they're talking to someone, they're talking on the phone, they're carrying luggage, they're pushing something. Almost always when people move around, they're not just walking like a soldier, they're actually busy with other stuff. This is, we're at Gehl, we're really obsessed with observation. I'd like to explain what this picture is. This is a picture of a stressed grandmother. And this is a picture of a boy who needs to go to the toilet. And this is the face of the grandmother who really doesn't want to have that accident. She's not thinking about crossing the road. She's not thinking about the tram. She's thinking of how she will explain to the boy's mother how the accident happened. And this is life. And in this efficiency of transportation, we have to remember these people, the grandmother and the little boy who needs to go to the toilet now. The tram tracks, of course, now maybe the tram is a luxury thing, but the track gives security. Now this waiter, he knows exactly where the tram is every day. And I think maybe that was a clue to why people can feel safe, if people know where they should be. Because the tram track is very clear, that tells us we know this is dangerous, this is not dangerous. And so I think if we look for systems which have clarity, where we know where we should be, and it could be with bike tracks, it could be with pavements and sidewalks, but if we know where we should be, that can make it easier. And I think it's important too that we're interested in all kinds of mobility, how people move in the city, and I think we shouldn't be too moral if we talk too much about being, Gehl are anti-car, or Gehl, and we're not anti, we're actually, we want access. We want people to access the assets of the city in all kinds of ways. Sometimes walking, sometimes in a bus, sometimes with a car. And it's all about how we can deliver access. And what I want to talk about today is how things kind of go together, and it's kind of a little puzzle that we have. And I think we all struggle with to put together walking and cycling, public transport and public space. and I think maybe there are some cars that we have to fit in there too. So how do we fit these things together? So I wanted to talk about walking and this culture of walking and how much equipment you need to have. These are Swiss children, and you can see how much reflective equipment they have just to cross the street. So we know this is kind of telling us something about the culture of just crossing the street is really hard. Whereas maybe in Latin America, you're a bit more casual about it. Yesterday, I talked about walking and this thing about being a hunter-gatherer, using your own energy, exploring the world, my godson learning to walk. And in the afternoon, Carlotta mentioned actually something about the culture of walking, because human beings are so clever that we never waste our energy. So we will always, no matter what, take the shortest route. And we heard about the architecture students in Buenos Aires. This is in Sweden, and it's really not a big difference. But people choose the mud and the slope rather than taking 5 more steps. So we can understand that human beings are, well, maybe not, I wouldn't say lazy, but very efficient. And in Buenos Aires, yesterday, evidence this happens here too. We use our energy in the most efficient way. And when it comes to crossing the street, sometimes even if there are hazards in the way, we will always, choose the shortest possible path. And I know this is a bit dark. This was yesterday outside the railway station, and I couldn't believe it. This mother with her baby was out there, out in traffic, following her desire line, walking the shortest possible route. And one of the groups yesterday studied this place, and you will know that this behavior of using the minimal amount of energy is what really drives people. And it's not just going here, I'm going over there. And people walking diagonally across the traffic because they know it's the most efficient way to move. And related to that, something about how we use our energy. What is worse than having to walk like that is having to walk up steps. And although we can think it's very beautiful, we know that whenever people have the chance to avoid the steps, they will avoid the steps. Because you use 10 times more energy going up, and this is why we have these exercises. But people don't choose to do this. And anybody who lives in a house with a stair will know what this is. This is the pile of things to take upstairs next time I'm going that way. Because I'm not going to make a detour to take the towel to the bathroom now. I'll do that sometime I'm going that way. Because this is really fundamental, how we use our body. We don't waste our energy on this. And of course, in public spaces, because we're not just soldiers walking, we are carrying stuff. We have children. We always avoid the steps. And then when you see this is the solution for safety, oh my God, am I going to have to walk an extra 5 kilometers just to cross the street? And if it's your grandmother or your grandfather, it becomes even worse. And so we know that whenever we see this kind of solution, which we're told is safe, we know there will always be people down on the ground, people who are using their intelligence, thinking, oh, I'm not going to waste my energy crossing the street. And we discovered that even in Japan, and I guess the Japanese must be the most well-behaved pedestrians in the world, when they've got a tunnel, a choice of going underneath in a tunnel or walking on ground level, they always choose to walk on the ground. So this is the steps down. And you can see here, or when they've got the staircase, the steps up, they choose to walk across time and time and time again. And of course, we know that makes for, this is 200 in Tokyo. I guess in Buenos Aires, that's like 2,000. But it's just, and of course, these are potential accidents. So I wanted to say something about how we move, the fact that we're human, that we're not walking like soldiers, we're carrying stuff, we're talking, we're multitasking, and also that we're maybe a little bit lazy. So have that in mind. Okay, Copenhagen, walking in Copenhagen and other places. And we told the story yesterday about Strøget, which became this very nice walking street. But of course, that's the exception. That's the main street in the city. But there are other ways of doing it, local streets. This is a local street which has become what we call a pedestrian priority street. So there are cars and taxis, or delivery trucks are allowed to move through, but at the speed of pedestrian, because the pedestrian has the right of way. And so here you can see they're cycling and walking at a very soft kind of space, and it's about eye contact, negotiating together and moving through the city. And I'm interested in all these little details. I mentioned yesterday the sidewalk that continues. When you have a side street, and I wanted to explain a little bit better the side street, because it makes such a big difference when the sidewalk continues. This is the side street. And when a car comes from the side, they come up over the surface of the pavement. And of course, if you're walking, they have to stop. And so you can see the situation. There's the guy walking, the car stops, waiting for people to come by. And then when the people are gone, they can then carefully drive over. And so a very, very simple detail, but it completely changes, the atmosphere of the block. And what this means is if you have this detail where the cars have to stop, maybe you can do this for 5 blocks or 8 blocks in the city. That means a kid can walk to school in a different way. Because, the problem for the kid walking to school is how many roads do I have to cross? And if suddenly you can go from maybe 10 to 2, the walk to school becomes so much easier. So it's a small thing. It's not big technology. It's kind of instinctive to understand because of the surface. The driver knows, okay, I have to drive differently here. I mean, if I go straight, I'll hurt my car. So it's a small instinctive thing which makes walking a little bit more civilized. Here's a cousin, a slightly different detail. This is also from Copenhagen. You can see the use of the cobbles, and that's so when the driver feels it, because you can feel the different surface, it makes a different noise when you drive over it. So it's kind of changing the culture and making the pedestrian feel more comfortable. And it's not just Copenhagen. This is an example from London. It's the same thing, a different surface, just giving a kind of priority to pedestrians. It's a visual thing, an acoustic thing, a very simple detail. The next little detail, which can really change walking in the city, is the bottleneck, when we make the street a little bit narrower for crossing. Now, this is one from Lyon in France, but our friends in Mar del Plata, they are the kings of the bottleneck, and they've introduced that. But we can see this is in Stockholm. You can see the pavement just extending out just on the corner, and of course there's a knock-on effect that the cafe and the bikes can begin to park, and the corner becomes a little bit more of a special place. Here we are in the center of Copenhagen, where there's really not very much space. And you can see it's really a question of maybe 1 extra meter, just a little bit of extra space to change the balance. Because the corner becomes a very complex place. Because you've got cars moving maybe in 4 directions. You've got people moving in 4 directions. People maybe changing their direction. It becomes a very complex place. And just recognizing this is a place to slow down, a place to have more options. So here's that one again. This is in Lyon, again in France. You can see where it's just making the crossing, the dangerous part, as narrow as possible. And then allowing other things to happen with the bikes and the little cafe extension. And in Buenos Aires, who would have guessed? Hundreds of these little details, taking 1 meter here, 2 meters, these small spaces which then become public places and get other uses. What a huge difference, this tiny intervention, just some metal poles, some plant pots, and the whole business of crossing the street becomes so much easier. And this is when I get really excited that the small difference can make such a big difference. A small change can make a big difference in your experience in walking in the city. Oh, and you see here becoming up a little bit more like a public space. Small dimensions, but such a big difference. And changing the way you move around the city. And also signaling with the plants and the furniture. These are signals to the drivers to slow down. This is a complex place. They have to think a bit more carefully. There are some unexpected things. So just changing the behavior of everybody at this point. And this is one in Mar del Plata. Just showing that you can do this anyway with paint, some simple infrastructure, and you make crossing the street so much easier. And then in São Paulo, this is one of my favorite interventions, making crossing the street half as wide, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lanes, and going down to 3 lanes. And the feeling of crossing 3 lanes instead of 6 lanes is a huge difference. And here, it's been very clever with paint. This is just paint. They've taken the beautiful Portuguese paving they have in Brazil. So they've made a painted version here and here to kind of make a visual trick, introduce the bike lane. And with just some paint, they've taken a really nasty crossing and made it into a soft, friendly one. So again, easy things we can do. Okay, a change in Copenhagen was the introduction of the median strip. And I don't know if there's a word for this in Spanish, but this is something which has really changed the streets in Copenhagen by introducing the strip in the middle. Sometimes it's flat, sometimes it's got a curb and it's got a surface, but it gives you a halfway place to cross the street. And this is maybe something which scares the traffic engineers, but on the streets which are kind of more neighborhood streets or medium busy streets, it makes crossing easier because you can get halfway across for one lot of traffic, and then you can wait for the traffic in the other direction. I was trying to explain this. This is a day in my life. Like when you're on the pavement, and if you have to cross everything at once, you have to make this insane rush because you've got traffic coming from 2 sides, and you have to race like a maniac across the street. But if you've got the possibility to stop on the way, and if you can, like, for example, the edge of the bike lane, stopping in the middle, stopping again, if you can cross the street in steps, it makes the business of crossing the street much, much easier. This is the median strip in London. This is Kensington High Street in London. And here they've even made it more adventurous. They've put the bicycle parking in the middle. And Kensington High Street is one of the busiest roads in London. It's classified as a highway. You can see it's a transportation corridor. And since they've introduced the median strip, traffic accidents have decreased. There's 30% less accidents in the street since they've introduced this. So people park their bike, but what's important, it gives people this halfway crossing because it recognizes that people want to go there and they don't want to go all the way around to get there, and making a safe way to cross the street. And I was actually really impressed, because when I saw pictures of it, I wondered, could this really work? And I was very impressed when I went there, and to see the way that you can see this is heavy traffic, but it's working. And again, here we have someone who's not concentrating while crossing the street, busy, and this is the reality that we have to deal with. This is the behavior of human beings in traffic. And of course, the street can be more than just a place to walk. Carlotta said yesterday, the streets can be a public space. And this is something we're exploring in Copenhagen more and more. Finding ways to invite people to stop and to stay, maybe play in the street. We have so little time. Everybody's so stressed. Even finding the time to go to the park, maybe that takes too long. But if you can play in the street, and also there's an idea in Copenhagen to invite adults also to play. So rather than making a playground where the kids play, and then you put a bench for the parents can sit and read the newspaper, or, talk on the phone, okay, 10 more minutes, Instead, they're trying to design play which will engage both adults and children to do things together, to give more quality time. This is one of the nicest ones. This is on the street, on the sidewalk, and it's just some trampolines built into the sidewalk. And of course, everyone who comes to Copenhagen is like, who takes responsibility for this? Because when people visit from other cities, they're like, how on earth can you do this? This is so dangerous. But if you maybe you underestimate people, that they can deal with this. This is a soft surface. You have the trampoline, and what's amazing is there are probably more adults than children playing on the sidewalk. And of course, that completely changes the atmosphere of what the sidewalk is. And of course, all of the things which invite us to stay. And Carlotta said yesterday as well that what's important, if we go from just mobility to staying and spending time over time, and families feeling comfortable and people feel safe. And this is something which I'm just putting in as a provocation. This is a strange thing that Danish people do. They leave their babies outside to sleep on the street. The mothers are inside drinking cappuccino, and the babies are out sleeping. And the idea is that they will grow up to become strong Vikings because they're sleeping in the cold. But of course, this is also a question about trust in the public space, trust between people, and that you don't believe your baby will be kidnapped. So there is also, of course, a culture of trust between people as well. And of course, what's important is by making the city more family friendly, more and more families are choosing to live in the city. And this is a very big cultural shift we see in Scandinavia. That before, you'd live in the city when you're young, and then you have a kid. Now we move to the suburbs because the children have to have grass or something. But more and more, and we know this because the number of children in daycare, the number of children in public schools is increasing every year, because the demand is there. More and more people are choosing to bring up children in the city because they feel it's becoming a nicer place for children to grow up. Because children don't just need grass. Children like to go to cafes, children can go to ballet lessons, children can go to the museum. There are so many things you can do in the city. And actually now it's maybe the underprivileged children who live in the suburbs, because the city offers so much. So there's some two bad Danish mothers letting their children sleep in the snow. And actually, there's another thing, I don't know, just about living with the weather. That, in Danish, they say there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. And so what's amazing is that around the year, people still use these public spaces. So anyway, that was about the behavior of walking and how small changes can change the culture of walking. What about cycling? And in many, many places, cyclists and pedestrians are enemies. You go, in London, I saw a report on television from London from last week where pedestrians were interviewed and they really hate cyclists because there's a confusion of where they should be. And of course, the bike is our friend, we think, but if the bike's moving fast and you're with your children, you're scared. So how can we make cycles and pedestrians friends? Now, first of all, it's very easy because it takes 1 second to get off my bike and become a pedestrian. It's very, very flexible. And of course, when we move on a bike, we're in the same airspace. We've got eye contact. You can shout you could hit them if you wanted to. And of course, the cycling thing, we have to see as part of everyday life. It's just one part of a whole package of things about everyday life. And I think it was something we said yesterday, this thing that a cyclist is a face on the street. And Morten Kabel said that the old people in Copenhagen, they wanted more cyclists, not because they cycled themselves, but because the faces on the street meant so much. This is something about softening the city, the soft mobility. And just like not everybody is walking like a soldier, not everybody is cycling like a sportsman. This could be the typical cycling day with a kid, with too much shopping, and we have to accommodate this kind of human cyclist. He's not the perfect cyclist, he's not the sportsman. He's got a kid, he's got stuff to carry. How do we take care of him? And how does it feel being a cyclist in the traffic when the big truck driver is looking down at this little family? And how do they feel in traffic? And so there's just something about the culture of how cycling meets the rest, these other things, the public space and people and pedestrians. So Copenhagen style. And what we've learned in Copenhagen, and that was what Morten said, was that if we make good conditions for cyclists, more people will cycle. And I told you yesterday, the grandmother, the kid, the grandfather, he's there as well, he's just a bit slower. The mother, and the important thing, you have to convince the mother that it's safe, otherwise the family won't cycle. So the whole family cycling, and then the idea of cycling everywhere. And I said yesterday, and I'll explain a little bit more, this really important system of the sidewalk, the bike track, the parked cars, and the driving. And I could talk for 1 hour just about this because this is so important, getting this right, because the curb between the bicycle track and the pavement or the sidewalk is very, very clear. It's like the tram tracks in Basel. You know, if I stand here, I'm in the bike's way. If I stand here, I'm safe. It's very, very clear. And so people are kind of comfortable with each other. Then you can be more and more relaxed. You know where you should be. The same thing between the cycles. And what's important here is the parked cars are always on the outside. And so when people get out of their car, and when they park the car, actually, even if I think probably parking the car in the city is one of the most stressful moments in life. First you have to find a parking space. You have to find a parking space, and you're really stressed because you're late. You find a parking space, and then you have to get into this parking space with all the other cars, beep, beep, as you try to reverse in. And then in the middle of that trying to park, if there are cyclists in your way, it becomes impossible. So it makes it so much easier for everyone by separating the cyclists from the cars parking. And generally, it's the driver who gets out. So the driver gets out, he's not opening the door onto the cycles, which of course is otherwise the situation if you put the parked cars between the cycle tracks. And it's a very common detail that we see, that they put the parked cars beside the pavement and the bikes out here. And so this thing I could talk about again and again. This very, very simple layout solves so many other things. It makes everything so much easier. And the business of cycling, because now I'm on my bicycle, I've got pedestrians on one side, I've got the cars on the other, so I know the pedestrians can't harm me. I'm safe. So I can cycle. It's much, much easier because, if you compare with the situation of having vehicles on two sides, and even this is the version in New York. There's a bike track, but I'm not relaxed here. I'm on the bike track, but I'm squeezed. And even if this guy is standing still, he's going to pull out sometime. And so this is like a very stressful situation. It's a bike track, but it's not a relaxed bike track. And this is what we're trying to get. This is the happy bike track, where there's space for people to cycle. There's the possibility to, encounter each other. You can speak, you can have eye contact, you can see the shops. And what's very exciting is we've done research in Copenhagen and in Melbourne, Australia, about the behavior of people on bicycles shopping. Because very often the shopkeepers don't want bicycle tracks because they lose the parking spaces. And if you ask the shopkeeper, he will say the people in cars spend more. So we've done research on this, and we discovered that the people who come by car, it's true they buy more because they have a car, they can carry more. But they stop much less because the guy in the car maybe comes once a week. The people on bikes stop all the time. It's very easy when you're on a bike to stop spontaneously, buy something, and get on again. But the shopkeeper doesn't remember the person who buys two things. The shopkeeper remembers the person who buys two bags. But when we analyzed the numbers, we found that the people buying two things, when you put it together, became more than the people buying things in the cars. And it was very interesting to present this data to the shopkeepers, showing them that the people on bikes actually spent more. So happy cycling. Yes? Is
it one direction lane?
Yes. Yes. This is very, very important. Always one direction. Always the same direction as traffic. So it's very, very instinctive. So there's another lane on the other side of the street. Thank you for the questions. It's very important. Always one direction. Because when you have accidents, and especially fatal accidents, they come from collision. And this system avoids collision because everybody is going in the same direction. And even if you should get hit by a car, you break your arm. You break your leg because you're at the same speed. If you hit someone in collision in a car, you could be killed. And so the one direction, is very, very important. And something about the dimension, as we all move in the same direction, that there could be a dimension which allows for conversation. And in the Copenhagen traffic department, there's the terminology conversational cycling. Because in terms of quality of life, the ability to talk with someone when you're cycling is very, very valuable. So what they're trying to do in newer generations is have a bigger dimension so that, especially important, the mother and the child can be talking because, you're going to school, you can talk about things. This is quality time with your child. As you cycle together, you can talk about things, you can talk about the day, you can talk about what you want to have for dinner tonight. This becomes a very special time. But the guy with the Lycra pants, he can get past as well. And so also recognizing that we have different kinds of cyclists, and we need to make space for them, the ones who are more relaxed and the ones who are moving faster. And so that we take this thing about being a human being, about being a mother and child talking, we take that seriously. Because, this is every day. And if that 15-minute, 20-minute ride to school, that can actually maybe be the nicest moment of the day. I mean, the time when you actually can bond with your child. And so we see all kinds of people cycling, particularly important older people. All over the world, we're seeing more old people. This is a way to help them get about, to be more mobile. And we can always ask ourselves, the difficulty of, does the street make it easy to have a bike? So this was just, again, the shopping moment. And if you're on a bicycle, you can almost smell the bread and stop and buy something. And you'll see generally the shops in Copenhagen, more and more, they design the front of the shop so you can park the bike to make the quick, spontaneous purchase. And I think we need to know more, and we should also gather data in other countries to understand this behavior of cyclists and commerce, because they'll be the first ones to complain if, when you start making bike lanes. And so, Copenhagen, more than 40% cycling. It's been a slow process, increasing that every day people cycling to work and to school. And it's something we'd say hardware and software. And the culture of those things going together now. Sometimes it goes together. They made a rule, I think it was 20 years ago, that every taxi should buy a bicycle rack, so they could take 2 bicycles for free. And it became standard. If to get the taxi license, you must have this rack. The taxi drivers were furious. Another stupid thing the mayor was doing. And of course, if you want to hear something bad about the mayor, ask a taxi driver. And 200 euros for this stupid piece of metal. And none of those communist hippies on their bicycles are ever going to take a taxi. Now, the taxis assumed that they were like cars. We're the cars. We buy gas. We have tires. We're the same thing. And the taxis always associated themselves with the cars. What they discovered was, when they got this stupid 200 euros rack, was that people with bikes don't have cars. And people with bikes go to parties and get tired. And they go to parties and they get drunk. And they go to parties and it starts raining. And these are the people who want to take a taxi home. People with cars don't need a taxi. They have their own taxi. And suddenly there was this understanding amongst the taxi drivers that the people on bicycles were actually customers. And for every time there was a new bike lane, it meant more space for bicycles, more customers, and less space for cars, which were competitors. And what happened was the taxi drivers went from being the most conservative group in the city to being kind of part of a multimodal, sustainable traffic system. And they could be very proud that they were part of the system, and they were actually making money at the same time. And so it's very interesting how these different things go together. So we have hardware and we have software. Hardware is all of these things like building bike lanes and bike crossings. This is flexible bike parking, which is during the day, it's for bikes, and at nighttime, it's for cars. Because often in the residential districts, people are coming home at night. And we have these very cute little traffic lights, and people come to Copenhagen, oh, that's so cute. You have little baby traffic lights for the people on bikes. But if you look, you can see that on the big traffic light, it's red, and on the little traffic light, it's green. And the rule is that when the lights change, the bikes get 6 seconds advantage. Now, 6 seconds sounds like nothing, like 6 seconds. But if you imagine 8:30 in rush hour traffic, red light, and then six seconds is a lot of time in traffic. 6 seconds was like, hey, loser. Making the cyclist feel empowered. But actually, there's another purpose, because when you have the right-hand turn, it's very useful to get all the bikes out of the way, and then when the lights change to green for the cars, they can turn because the cars are out of the way. So it's a kind of a win-win. But again, a small detail, 6 seconds, but completely changing the experience of cycling in the city. This is a little support. It's quite nice when you stop at traffic lights for, waiting for the 6 seconds. You get a little something to lean on. It's a piece of metal, and this says, get there healthily. And then the private sector is also responding. This is outside a supermarket, and the supermarket is providing bike parking. They're saying at the back they've got people who have a cargo bike, they have a special bike park for cargo bikes, and even the supermarket is offering free air for cyclists. Because again, the private market is understanding, okay, this is really good, and actually you can give many more free parking spaces to cyclists than to cars. So the commercial side is adapting. Software, a whole range of things you can do. We talked a little bit yesterday. This is a very important campaign. I showed you the picture of looking down on the cyclists from the truck. Most cyclists don't realize that the truck driver can't see them. And this says, watch out for the blind angle. So this is a campaign to remind cyclists that actually they have to think about when the truck driver can't see them. And this is now maybe the very dark side of cycling. The trucks in Denmark are also fitted with this extra little fence, this protective grille, which stops the cyclist in an accident going underneath the truck, because that's actually one of the common accidents. And this very cheap piece of metal stops the possibility in an accident of a cyclist being able to go underneath the truck. So again, this is not expensive, complicated technology. Very simple things that make cycling safer in the city. So this is kind of just information for cyclists. This is the campaign that says, catch the cyclist with your eyes, not with the car door. So the people opening the car door should remember the cyclist. Free smoothie when you cycle to work. You have campaigns to encourage people to cycle to work. And I told about yesterday about the driving license that every 7-year-old in Denmark gets the opportunity to take a bike driver's license outside on the street, like on the real street. And it's a really strong sight when you're driving in the street. You see these little children on their bikes, and you're really reminded, okay, it's the time of year, school will be starting soon again, that these people are also part of the people in traffic. And I don't know if I can, this is called snow. I don't know if you know what that is. We get it every year. It falls from the sky. One of the things they do now, because the clearing of the snow is one of the things you do in a city in the north. The first street clearing of snow is the bike tracks. The city has invested in little mini snow plows to clean the snow from the bike tracks first, before the cars, so that in the morning on snowy days, the fastest way to get around is by bike. So you prioritize the bike in every situation. And that means, of course, that on the snowy days, people choose to take their bikes. And it's not because they're crazy. It's because it's the most, easiest way to get around. And no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. And you see, everybody just learns, kind of to do with this. Sorry, and everybody can bike. And there are the white men in suits, old men, they can cycle. People cycle to work in their business clothes. This is my hairdresser. He cycles. Very elegant. Musicians cycle. Old people cycle, and it's really nice. And it's actually one of the best movement things you can do, health things like getting exercise, just cycling, and giving these older people independence. Sorry, okay, it's repeating. You can carry an extra bike. Families can bike. The kindergarten can have a bike. You can take 8 children, 12 children out for a trip on the bikes. And this is very common in Copenhagen, that because it's nice to be out, the children don't need to be locked inside in institutions. You can take them out into the city. And of course, whole families can have bikes getting around and moving around. And how you dress for the bike. You don't need to wear sports clothes. And that says something about the culture of cycling. It's very relaxed. You can do it in any way. Everybody cycles. You can cycle when you're pregnant. You can cycle when you're very young. And even when you're old. And actually, this is Jan's mother-in-law, who cycled until she was in her 80s. And even Jan's mother, when she was 92, she always had the bike with her. When she was 90, she stopped cycling. But she brought the cycle with her because she felt it made her look younger if she had a bicycle with her. And actually, she didn't want to have one of those kind of walking frames. So she took the bicycle to carry the shopping. And it was just so nice. And she said, oh yeah, it makes me look younger. And of course, you can cycle all year. And actually, for a child, this is much nicer than going by car. This is much, with the wind in your face and kind of being part of everything. This is much more exciting sitting on the front of the bike than in the back of a car. And of course, like you said, you can do it all year. And why do people cycle in Copenhagen? And this is a subject which we think is very interesting because we have to understand the behavior. And since, for the last 15 years, I think we've been doing bicycle surveys and trying to understand the behavior of people. And for me, the most interesting one was the first time we asked the question. So this is the first time we asked the question because this got so much attention that the next year people started to change their answer. But the first time we asked people in Copenhagen, why do you cycle? And the first question was, is it because you care about the environment? So what percentage of people in Copenhagen said they cycled because they cared about the environment? It's Scandinavia, they're educated. 1% said that they cycled, that was 2006, 10 years ago, they said they cycled because they cared about the environment. Is it because you could save money? Do they cycle because it's cheap? 6% said they cycled because it was cheap. It's a rich country. Denmark, Scandinavia, Denmark, 6%. Is it to get exercise? Do you cycle to get exercise? Almost 20%. Now this is getting interesting. It's my body. I've got to get ready for the beach for the summer. No, but people do it because it's an egoistic thing. It's good for me. It's my body. I'm taking care of me. And then is it because it's convenient and easy? Convenient? More than 60% said they cycled because they thought it was convenient. And I think this is how we have to change it. We cannot sell cycling as an environmental thing. It's not just for hippies and tree huggers and communists. it's because it's actually the most convenient way to get around the city. And like we said, people cycle all year round. And the numbers just get more, and now they're making even wider bike tracks because the demand is so great. And what's interesting as well, the Danish state has also analyzed these figures. And what they've discovered is that for every kilometer that somebody cycles in Denmark, Denmark makes a profit. Because people are healthier, there are less bad accidents, children perform better in school, there's less pollution, the quality of urban space is better, which increase property values. There are so many factors you can bring into this. And every kilometer that's driven by car in Denmark loses money with bad health, worse environment, and so on. And it becomes very interesting that for all of the different parties in the government, because it also becomes an economic question. And I suppose this is the story of cycling. A long time ago, it was very exclusive to have a bicycle. But of course, very soon the rich people got new toys, and the car became the symbol of rich people. And the poor guy on his bike always felt like he was the loser, and that only when he got a car, he would be rich. And even, the poor guy, he's got his little motorcycle, his moped. And then, of course, we fought for democracy so that everybody could have a car. And on the day when everybody has a car, this is what the rich man does. And it's actually, I don't know whether this is actually almost a problem now, that some places the bicycle is seen as something for rich people. And I know in San Francisco, sometimes Myra's told me that she can go to an event and say, "Oh, you've come on a bicycle." And like it's a bad thing, because we've come in this very strange circle. Because of course, this is the most accessible form of transportation because it's so cheap and accessible. And it's very strange now because this is an advertisement for champagne, and they use a bicycle to advertise champagne. This is the Prince of Denmark. You heard about him yesterday. This is the Prince of Denmark taking his kid, who will be the future king and the next king, going to daycare and school. And can you take this culture anywhere else? So I talked about it yesterday with the Copenhagen bike tracks. This is the city of Melbourne, Copenhagen bike tracks, and we talked about yesterday, and the difference. British Empire on the left, but the same concept, one direction, other side of the street, the higher curb. Now you can see there are differences. You can see that the people in Melbourne are maybe not as comfortable as the ones in Copenhagen. They've got helmets, reflective vests. It says that the culture of cycling isn't quite the same yet, but hopefully the Copenhagen-style bike lanes will help that. We also worked in New York, and I mentioned briefly yesterday the bike tracks there. And this is the before and after of the painted system. I just wanted to tell you something about the pilot project, because sometimes you don't get it right the first time. And for example, the first generation pilot projects in New York, there was the sidewalk, then the new bike track, and then we made this new extra sidewalk. And we discovered this was a really big mistake, because what happened was people want to be here and people want to be here, and they were crossing the bike track all the time. So from this, we went to this. So we changed from the in-between solution, and in the second generation, when we repainted, we moved the broader pavement and we moved the bicycles out to the edge, like in Copenhagen, because we knew that worked better. And this is the advantage of the pilot, is you can be flexible, it allows for change. So you can see the same thing again here. The sidewalks extended and they push the bikes out to the edge so the pedestrians and the cyclists don't get angry with each other. And all of this bike culture, you can do so many things. The policeman becomes so much nicer when he's just a guy on a bike. It becomes so much more accessible, and all of this business that can happen, and bike systems, bike taxis, all over the world, we're seeing this opens up to new opportunities. And of course, it's also becoming a bit trendy. It's kind of a hipster thing, and we see every fashion shop has a bicycle in it. And I don't think this is in Buenos Aires. We saw these were 2 fake bikes strategically parked outside very designed places. And I think we should use this as an advantage. It's a good time. The media is interested in bicycles. We should take advantage of this trendiness and turn it to our advantage. So we shouldn't be angry when a posh interior shop puts a bike outside. We should be really happy that it's becoming normalizing cycling. So even the Champagne and even Louis Vuitton having a bicycle is actually maybe a good thing. So, okay, cycling, walking, what about public transport? And again, this is something about seeing it as part of a whole system. And I think at Gehl, we're not experts on making the best efficient rail system or the best BRT but it's about landing the public transport into an environment. This is like a day in my life, and this is what I'm thinking about, this thing of going from being in the shop, in the arcade, and just buying your ticket and smoothly moving on to the public transport. There's ease of getting on and off. And maybe one of the first things, which I think is really great about buses, and we've got with the Metrobus in Buenos Aires, the bus, we've seen a renaissance of trams, of tranvia in Europe, is the idea that the pavement is the platform. That you can be in the same place. 1 minute you could be having a cup of coffee, and then a minute later you can be on the bus. And this is very, very convenient. And this is very, very flexible because you can be standing there, you can see the bus coming, you can say, okay, I'll wait for the next one. You can plan your time. And again, it's something very, very simple, but this ease of getting on and off and being part of the pavement, the pavement as a platform is a really great start. And this is why, where I see transport systems working really well. This is in Germany, where in Göttingen, where there's no terminus, there's no special bus terminus. The bus terminus is the street. And this is outside the station in Copenhagen. You stay on the same level, walk across the little median, and all these different sizes of buses can exist. So we've got double-deckers and single-deckers and minibuses. They can be a plural system. They can all use the same stop. It's very flexible. They all use the same bus stop. And the technology doesn't even have to be that hard, just to have the one step into the bus. The low-level buses can make it so easy just getting on board. And of course, as we're human beings and we're carrying stuff, this one step getting on, makes things so much easier. Just one step, carrying your shopping trolley, your buggy, a small detail which makes life so much easier. And also just accessing the transport. If you can do that at ground level, because I was talking before, like the up and the down, if you can just go straight across and straight onto the transport, that always makes things much easier. This is in Bern, in Switzerland, where the transport hub is actually just part of the street. So rather than going to a separate place, you can be 1 minute from the department store, 1 minute from the cafe. You have the terminus, and they have both trams and buses can use the same stop. So you can have both in the same system, but you can make this very accessible. So, and this is also something about the experience, because the public transport's not just about the vehicle, it's about where you wait and how you wait. And I know when we started working in Sao Paulo, that one of the reasons that middle-class women didn't use public transport was not because of the bus, but the place you had to wait for the bus. The place you had to get on the bus and get off the bus was not perceived as a safe place. But if you can get on and off the bus, if you can change between buses and trams in a safe, comfortable public place, you feel much more comfortable about the whole system. And of course, when you have to go all the way, into the platform like this, maybe it becomes less attractive using the system because you can't be quite so spontaneous for getting on and off the bus. So we have to be aware when we design the bus stop, when we think very, very efficiently like an engineer, that maybe we lose some of the spontaneous behavior, seeing your bus coming, having a cup of coffee while you're waiting. So we have to always get the balance between being a human being and being an efficient engineer. And so some of the things sometimes happens with when you're in this more isolated environment, not connected with the street. And also recognizing that sometimes if we put the BRT too heavy, that actually it divides the street. And it becomes like a wall, and then the shops in the middle start to die because they cannot survive with this wall down the middle. So we have to think how we can land the public transport in a gentle way. Once you're on board, and of course, the great thing about ground level transportation is you can take things with you. And if you can design the system to be a bit more generous, you can make it easy to bring the stroller or your luggage or we can make it comfortable on board with some, I don't know if you can see here, some traffic information so you know where the next stop is, also what your connection might be. You make it comfortable. You can see this guy's listening to music. These ones have got their phones. And of course, coming back to being a human being. This doesn't happen in a car. And this was on the tram in Germany. And this is just this little situation where actually 3 children of 3 different races suddenly met. And it was actually just a very funny situation because they were very, very curious about each other. And they really wanted to touch each other, like, ooh, are you real? Kind of. And it was very nice. And it was actually, because generally it's not a question of race, it actually is a question about different economic groups who maybe normally don't meet. And it becomes a very nice situation when these different groups meet in this situation and they negotiate with the pram and the children speak. And then this old grandmother, and maybe she's the German woman you expect to be very conservative, and she's watching this really delightful situation of these different children, and it reminds us something about being human. And so this is just, one of the things that can happen with public transport. And as you move through the city at eye level, and that's why I think it's great, and that's what I really enjoy now when I take the Metrobus in Buenos Aires. You move through at eye level, and you see the city. You see what's going on. You see people on the streets. You see the seasons. You see the weather, the trees. You see what's happening. You can see if there's a sale on in a shop. All of these things happen when you move through the city at eye level. And of course, you can do other things to make public transport more comfortable. Free internet. You can give better information. This is back in Denmark now, where they have lots of information about where you are, which makes you more relaxed about being on public transport. And then just thinking about how we pull things together, about a hybrid trip. And for example, if bicycles and public transport go together, and that's something they've been working a lot in Denmark, the idea that you can cycle to the station, then take your bike with you on the train, and then you can cycle again at the other end. And that can give you a very, very efficient trip. So having this situation, and you can see the graphics here. It says bike, very, very loudly. Bikes are allowed on the train. And they made this double door. And this was very successful to put bikes on the train. In fact, it was so successful there wasn't enough space. So what they did was they made more space because this was such an efficient way of moving people. Because people could go cycle to the station, travel very fast, and then travel on their bike on the other end. And it solved so many other things. Now, the city took about 15 years to do this because it was a really hard thing to negotiate because the railway company felt this was not so efficient because they were losing passenger space. So it has to be seen in a bigger perspective. But this really influences cycle behavior. And just to say one final thing about cyclists, we believe that if you want people to stop driving a car, you have to offer them a very exclusive public transportation system with Mercedes-Benz or Volvo trams or something. What we discovered is the easiest change to make is from car to bike. Because people who drive cars, they don't have a timetable. The people that drive cars, they're not used to sharing. People that drive cars are used to choosing their own route. And in this way, the bicycle is actually even better. Because you can cycle from your bedroom to your desk. You can cycle so you choose the route exactly. And actually, if you want, you can buy, if you're very proud of your car, you can buy a very expensive bike as well. And if you include this in the train system, it means that you can move extremely efficiently. Like you can get the best of both systems. You can get from your front door all the way to your office and back again. This is on the metro system, where it's also possible to take bikes. And if you can take bikes, it means you can also bring wheelchairs and other forms of transport. And I guess we can think about the seamless journey. I don't know if does that translate to Spanish? The seamless journey, yeah. And having a whole package of transport, because there's not just one solution. And in Copenhagen, we've got metros and minibuses, we've even got boats, and there are trains that go to Sweden. And so you have lots of different companies. But if you can get everybody to talk together, if you can use the same ticket system, and now we're in a position with technology where it's with smart cards that different private companies can collaborate so you can have one card. And I live in the south of Sweden. I come by train and I come to Copenhagen. I can take the metro, I can take the boat. I can do that between two countries which have two different currencies. I can use the same travel card. So that makes it so much easier. Seamless journey, getting off the bus and onto the train. And finally, public space, which is the big Gehl subject, holding everything together, because the place you wait for the bus, the place you arrive in, is actually what makes the whole thing work. And if we use public, so we think about the place you wait for the tram, and how we start rethinking it, and this is a kind of a segue into what's coming next, is we can change public space, and the street is a public space. And I'm always really excited when I travel around the world. This is in Valdivia, this is in Montreal, this is in Lyon. We can see this movement of actually we can turn the public space into something else, which makes standing still and sitting, which is part of mobility, make more sense. So I think if we put all of these things together, cycling, walking, public space, public transport, these are the things that we have to, the pieces of the puzzle we need to fit together. One final thing, more important than building eco-buildings, this was the recent research in Denmark, looking at the reduction of CO2 by designing passive buildings, the most advanced technological eco-buildings. Basically, what we discovered is that this is how much reduction you can save by having eco-buildings. Basically, if you locate close to quality public transport, you save 10 times more energy you do than building an eco-building. I mean, we can give you the more facts afterwards. So the mobility thing is a really big part of sustainable energy. And it's part of life. And I think just to end with this idea that if we can make public transport land, so when I look out of my window, I can see the bus coming, I can go in the shop, get on the bus, And all of the time, this is about relationships, about getting on the bus, speaking to the human being who's driving the bus, speaking to people in the bus. This is about making a transportation system for human beings. And finally, it's for her as well. So hopefully some ideas to help you in the course of today. Are we having a break now? Break? We now have a 15-minute coffee break. Thank you very much, and see you in 15 minutes.